You thought that silence meant it was over, that walking away would only prove their worst fear, that love was unsafe, that intimacy always ends in abandonment. But what if it was the silence itself that stirred something deeper in them? Something even they didn't fully understand? They once pulled away when you reached out, flinched when you opened your heart. They seemed cold, distant, unreachable, like you were chasing someone who had already made peace with losing you. But now, they're watching, quietly, secretly, as if the very thing they pushed away is the thing they can't stop needing. And you wonder, why now? Why do they suddenly seem present, just as you stop trying? Why do they orbit around your silence like it's the only language they understand? This wasn't manipulation. You weren't playing games. You were tired. You stopped over-explaining, over-giving, over-proving. You chose peace instead of proving your worth. You chose your own heart over begging for theirs. And that's when it happened. The shift, the crack in their avoidant armor, the first real glimpse of emotional gravity. What if the move that finally made them turn toward you wasn't a loud declaration of love, but a quiet return to yourself? What if the energy that finally drew them back was the one that no longer needed them? And what if that very detachment, that sacred reclaiming of your center, was the unexpected key to making an avoidant realize what they've lost? Because here's the truth you were never taught. Avoidants don't chase love. They chase safety and distance. Until one day, distance is all that's left. And suddenly, it's not safety anymore. It's loneliness. It's silence that echoes louder than your words ever did. And when they finally feel the impact of your absence, not your presence, they begin to awaken. But that awakening isn't what you think. It's not an apology, not a confession, not a movie scene reunion. It's subtle, cautious, often delayed. And if you don't understand the deeper psychology behind it, you'll mistake their return for love when it may just be a symptom of confusion, loss, or longing for control. So the real question is this: what exactly did you do or stop doing that made them chase what they once ran from? And why does this unexpected move, this shift in energy, shake something so deep in the avoidant psyche that it bypasses fear and stirs desire? Let's go there, deep into the unspoken code of attachment wounds, silent communication, and the rare moment when emotional distance becomes the very thing that ignites connection. Because once you understand this, you'll never chase the wrong way again. Let us explore the exact attachment, dynamics, and unconscious triggers that make this unexpected move work on an avoidance nervous system. They didn't start missing you when you left. They started missing you when you stopped trying to stay. There's something paradoxical that lives at the heart of the avoidant attachment style. They long for intimacy, yet they fear it. They crave closeness, but associate it with engulfment, disappointment, or shame. So they run, they push, they withdraw, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't know how to hold it. And here's what nobody tells you: when you stop chasing, you stop confirming their fear. Avoidants are often carrying an unconscious internal narrative, a belief system built in childhood, sometimes never questioned. If someone gets too close, I'll lose myself. If I depend on someone, I'll be disappointed. Love is conditional. I have to be perfect or distant to be safe. So when you were giving, open, emotionally present, as healthy as your love may have been, it triggered their early wiring, not because you did anything wrong, but because intimacy was unfamiliar, unsafe. It awakened their defenses. But when you pulled back, something strange happened. Their system, which had been used to fending off emotional intrusion, suddenly experienced space. And in that space, the emotional charge shifted. You were no longer a threat to their independence. You were no longer trying to reach into their guarded heart. You were no longer confirming their fear that closeness means control. Instead, you became something they lost. And loss does what love often couldn't. It cracks their fantasy of self-sufficiency. It confronts them with a terrifying realization. They're not chasing me anymore, and I don't know how to reach them now. This is where the psyche begins to disorganize itself, because now the avoidant is no longer in control of the narrative. Your emotional unavailability mirrors their own, and suddenly, they feel what you once did. The silence, the confusion, the longing. Only this time, it's their own. This is the unexpected move. Not manipulation, not punishment, but regulation. You regulated your own nervous system. You stopped needing them to complete your story. And that shift, not your words, not your presence, created a magnetic dissonance they couldn't ignore. In Jungian terms, you withdrew the projection, because as long as you were pursuing, they could project their internal mother wound or father wound onto you. You were too much. You were the suffocating caretaker they couldn't please as a child, the unpredictable parent whose love felt like pressure. But when you stopped, when you returned to your own center, they were left with only their own reflection. And for the first time, they had to ask, was it really them? Or was it me? That's what makes avoidance chase. Not your love, but your absence of need. Not your validation, but your quiet dignity. When you stopped rescuing them from their emotional paralysis, you unknowingly handed them the only medicine that works. A mirror that says, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to beg you. I'm not even here to wait for you. I loved you deeply, but I also love myself enough to leave. This hits different because it doesn't feed the avoidance cycle. It breaks it. And this is what stirs the chase, not a dramatic exit, not a flurry of blocked messages, but your stillness. Your emotional detachment is not cruelty. It's clarity. It forces them to confront what they couldn't when you were trying so hard to stay. That intimacy was never the threat. Avoidance was. And now that you're no longer soothing them, no longer dancing around their fears, their nervous system is left to deal with the very feelings they spent years escaping. This is when the avoidance sometimes comes back. Not because they've healed, but because your absence has forced a reckoning. And in some cases, that reckoning leads to a choice to face their wounds or to repeat the cycle with someone else. The question is, will you be there again when they do? Or will you remain in your power, still rooted, no longer chasing, and let them meet you where you've already arrived? What breaks the avoidant illusion? It doesn't hit them right away. Not when you stop texting. Not when you fall silent. Not even when you finally walk away. Avoidants are masters at convincing themselves that detachment is strength, that being unfazed is proof they're in control. And for a while, they believe it. They tell themselves you were too emotional, too demanding, too much. But what they don't realize is that what they call peace is really just numbness. A familiar fog they've lived in since childhood. A fog that protected them once, but now keeps love out. But then, one ordinary moment breaks the illusion. They hear a song. They pass by a place. They open a drawer and find something small. A note, a gift, your handwriting on an old envelope. And suddenly, the numbness breaks. It's not about the object. It's what it awakens. A memory, a presence, a feeling they didn't know they had buried. Because here's the truth they run from. Avoidants do feel. They just delay the experience until they think they're safe to feel it. And by then, it's too late. This is the moment they realize they were never truly indifferent. They were disconnected from their own needs, from their own grief, from the part of them that wanted to be held, but never learned how to ask for it. Jung would call this a confrontation with the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've disowned, denied, or projected onto others. For the avoidant, the shadow contains vulnerability, fear, need, and desire. And for the first time, your absence becomes the flashlight that exposes it. They realize they pushed away the one person who made them feel seen. And not because you hurt them, but because you saw them too clearly. And that, for someone whose entire defense system is built on invisibility, is terrifying. But here's the secret nobody tells you. Avoidants aren't haunted by your love. They're haunted by what your love awakened in them and what they couldn't face at the time. You touched a place they had locked away. Maybe it was the little boy who grew up in a home where emotions were punished. Maybe it was the little girl who learned early on that needing someone meant being abandoned. Maybe it was the teenager who had to act unbothered to survive rejection. Whoever they were back then, that version of them is the one who let go of you. But now, they're meeting a new version of themselves. One who can't stop remembering. One who can't unfeel what they suppressed. One who begins to whisper, not out loud, but inwardly. I pushed away the only person who never asked me to be perfect. I lost someone who would have stayed, if only I had let them. And that's when the illusion collapses. Because avoidance only works when the story is. They were too much. I didn't need them anyway. I'm better off alone. But when memory becomes louder than pride, when silence becomes heavier than fear, when you no longer validate their distance with your pursuit, something changes. They no longer see you as the one who needed too much. They see you as the one they couldn't receive. That shift is subtle, but it's profound. It's the beginning of longing. Not for attention, not for drama, but for the connection they told themselves they didn't want until it was gone. And here's what makes it so powerful. You didn't create that shift by explaining. You didn't get there by proving your worth. You didn't force it with ultimatums. You got there by reclaiming your space, by becoming unavailable, not out of punishment, but out of peace. And that peace, it's disarming, because it tells them, you are free to go, but I am also free to stay gone. It's in that freedom that the avoidant is forced to confront their deepest fear. Not that you'd leave, but that you'd stop waiting for them to come back. And when that fear becomes reality, they begin to feel everything they once ran from. When the avoidant becomes the pursuer, it doesn't happen with grand gestures. It begins with hesitation. A late-night text that just says, "Hey," or a message out of nowhere, "Was just thinking about you." And behind those few harmless words, a silent hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll still be there. You see, the avoidant doesn't come back charging through the gates of emotional clarity. They test the waters, gently, indirectly, because to admit they miss you would mean confronting the very thing they've spent a lifetime avoiding: vulnerability. But here's what they're learning the hard way. Silence has consequences, especially when the person they pushed away no longer revolves around them. They're expecting you to respond like before, with softness, with immediacy, with the kind of love that used to chase, that used to explain, that used to hope. But this time, you don't, because something in you has shifted. And ironically, that's what makes them panic. You're not angry. You're not begging. You're simply different, detached, centered, free. And in the eyes of the avoidant, this new version of you is magnetic. Because now, you are what they've never been taught to be. Secure in your worth, at peace with the unknown, unafraid of loss, because you've survived it. This is where the reversal begins. They start reaching out more. They ask how you're doing. They bring up inside jokes, shared memories, soft moments from the past, as if trying to stitch their way back into your present. But it's not really about the jokes. It's about reestablishing connection without yet admitting what they truly feel. They want to know, did I lose you for good? Is there still a part of you that's waiting? Can I still matter to you? Without having to be fully open. And when they feel you pulling back instead of leaning in, that's when something unthinkable happens. They begin to chase, not because they've suddenly healed, not because they've figured it all out, but because losing your emotional availability reveals what they truly needed all along: safety. And now, they see that safety wasn't something they had to earn. It was something you offered freely, until they took it for granted. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For the avoidant, your silence is that awakening. It forces them to confront that maybe they weren't protecting themselves from harm. They were protecting themselves from love. And now, the thing they feared most is the only thing that feels real. But let's be clear, just because they begin to chase doesn't mean they're ready for what love requires. They may try to re-enter your life in familiar ways, light, casual, half-hearted. They may not yet know how to express what they feel, only that they feel it. And that's where your power lives. Not in proving anything, not in fixing them, but in holding the boundary that says, you don't get to come and go as you please. I deserve reciprocity, not confusion. If you want to stay, show me you can hold love, not just want it. Because the unexpected move that made them chase was you no longer needing to be chosen. It was your absence that revealed your value, your peace that exposed their chaos, your growth that made their patterns impossible to ignore. And now, they're the one wondering. They're the one analyzing every message. They're the one staying up late, replaying what they didn't say and what they wish they had. The reversal doesn't mean revenge. It means revelation. It's the moment the avoidant sees themselves not as the one who had the upper hand, but as the one who never learned how to hold a good thing without running from it. And the only question that remains is whether they will finally do the inner work to deserve your return, or whether they'll simply watch you become the person they couldn't keep. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. What makes you unforgettable to them? It wasn't your looks. It wasn't your charm. It wasn't how perfectly you played the part. It was your presence, the way you stayed, long after most would have walked away, the way you listened, even when their silence hurt, the way you offered love, not as a bargain, but as a gift. That's what they remember now. That's what keeps them up at night, not just missing you, but wondering, why did I push away the one person who never tried to control me? Why did I leave the only place I felt emotionally seen? Why did I sabotage the very thing I secretly prayed for? You were unforgettable not because you were perfect, but because you were real in a world that made them afraid to be. You didn't need to manipulate to be needed. You didn't punish them for their walls. You tried to understand them. You didn't chase them to feel worthy. You simply showed up in love, even when it cost you pieces of yourself. And they felt that. You weren't just someone. You were a mirror of everything they were too guarded to become. Secure, emotionally present, unapologetically open. And now that you've walked away, not in anger, but in self-respect, they're left with something more haunting than guilt. The memory of what it felt like to be safe with you. You were home, and they don't know how to build that without you. Because here's the truth most never say out loud. Avoidants don't forget the one who loved them deeply. They may not admit it. They may not fight for it when it matters. but they carry the echo of that love quietly, painfully, into every next connection. Because nobody else will speak to the unhealed places the way you did. Nobody else will sit beside their fears instead of judging them. Nobody else will stay long enough to see the child beneath the armor. And now that you've become the one they can't reach, they realize something devastating. It wasn't love that scared them. It was being fully seen in love. They didn't lose you because you were too much. They lost you because they weren't ready to feel everything you awakened in them. And that's the paradox that keeps them stuck. They ran to feel safe. But safety is what they lost when they let you go. You didn't need to chase. You didn't need to convince. All you had to do was heal. Because once you stopped making their wounds your responsibility, you became the version of you that they always needed. But you finally realized you didn't need them to be whole. And that shift, that's the unexpected move that changed everything. You're unforgettable not because you remained, but because you left with grace. Not to punish, not to shame, but to protect your light from a love that couldn't yet hold it. So if they ever come back, remember, you are not here to prove you're worthy. You're here to be met, to be chosen, to be loved freely, not fearfully. If they can't offer that, let them go again. And this time, without a single crack in your peace. Because someone who truly sees you, who's done the work you've done, who doesn't run when love gets real, they won't need to be chased. They'll walk toward you, eyes open, heart ready, and arms that don't close when things get hard. Until then, stay rooted in your power. Let your peace speak louder than your pain. And never forget, you are unforgettable, not because they miss you, but because you finally stopped forgetting yourself. And now you know, you don't have to beg to be seen, or shrink yourself to keep someone who never learned how to hold love without fear. And if this message spoke to something deep inside you, if you've been there, felt that ache, and finally understand what it means, then this is your moment. Leave a comment with a simple, "I see it now," because awareness is where healing begins. And your story might be the mirror someone else needs to break their cycle too. Subscribe for more content that doesn't just scratch the surface, but speaks to the soul. And don't forget to tap the like button if this hit home. You're not chasing anymore. You're choosing. And that changes everything.